Welcome to the next show 2024. I'm Julian Vetten and I have Andy Kitchen as my guest today. He's the co-founder of Cortical Labs and we're about to find out what he's doing. Hey Andy.
Hey Julian, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, what are you doing exactly?
Okay, yeah.
Cortical Labs.
Cortical
what is
Labs.
That?
Cortical Labs. So, Cortical Labs is a synthetic biological intelligence company. We built a system called DishBrain, which is basically live cells growing inside a computer chip with a kind of brain-computer interface. So this is like a piece of a brain outside a body that can interact with a simulated world in a completely closed loop. And we demonstrated being able to teach it to do things, so create goal-directed behavior, and we taught it to play the game Pong.
Okay.
So we got neurons in a petri dish through a sort of brain-computer interface to play Pong, to live in a simulated world. Sort of like a tiny miniature version of the Matrix, maybe the Matrix 0.1.
That sounds like a lot of science fiction. Can you take us a little deeper into that? What is the use case of that?
Yeah, so right now the use case we're focusing on with our production system. So our prototype demonstrated that was possible, and now we're working on our production system called the CL1, which is already going through some pilot trials with research groups, and there's a lot of interest in the pipeline. And this is for drug discovery. So if you want to discover a new drug, understand its effects on the brain, you can test it in a situation where you can actually measure the effect on cognition, not just, for example, do the neurons fire more or less, but actually how they process information when they are embodied in an environment constantly interacting through feedback.
Embodiment, what is that? What can I think about that?
So embodiment is the general, means being enmeshed and fully embedded in an environment. So you act, you sense the consequences of your actions, you can act again seamlessly, you're continuously learning with no kind of break. And so this, I think, sharply contrasts with a lot of machine learning models, statistical models, which are definitely not embodied. They have a stored data set, they run a training process, which is kind of batch oriented. There's no fluidity, it doesn't happen in real time. So you could think of a big contrast between something like DishBrain and today's artificial intelligence algorithm is that DishBrain, it exists in real time interacting with an environment, this piece of brain, whereas a artificial neural network, for example, is essentially being sort of trained in this very kind of one-shot, non-embodied, non-real-time way in a data center somewhere.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we don't need to train the dish brain because it can train itself, or how can I think of that?
Well, it's really funny you would even say it like that, right? Because I think the concept of learning and intelligence has been somewhat distorted by the excitement around sort of statistical machine learning. Mm-hmm. And look, it's an area I've done a lot of work and I love it. But the thing is that when you think of something like learning and intelligence, like what an animal does or what a child does, it's completely continuous. It's not some mathematical algorithm which is applied to the child. Mm-hmm. It is a innate and intrinsic process which they go through. There's no kind of separation between thinking and learning, because just like an animal is also embodied in the world, constantly acting and sensing. So in some ways, now we think of learning as, okay, we're going to put data in a bucket, we're going to put it in the data center, and that's learning. I'd say, no, that's more like statistics, right? So yes, what's absolutely incredible is with the right stimulus and the right environment and the right interface, neurons themselves will naturally self-organize to produce goal-directed behavior, to act, to win this game of Pong, to increase their score. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Sorry, you mentioned the right stimulus. What is a stimulus for a single brain cell that has no connection to the rest of the body? How do you do that?
Oh, so this is a group. This is a culture of many brain cells. So sort of hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even sometimes up to 1 million cells grown in a layer over very small electrodes. Mm-hmm. So you could kind of think of it as in a classic brain-computer interface, you have the animal and you are putting the interface surgically into the animal. In this case, we have our interface and we are culturing the cells inside it. So you have a lot of contact between the cells and the electrodes, you have a lot of bandwidth, you have a lot of control, and you have a lot of reproducibility. So we have certain areas, certain groups of electrodes, which are stimulation electrodes. So that means when certain things happen in this simulated world, in the game, those electrodes become stimulated with a small voltage or current. And there are other areas which are kind of a simulated motor area. And so when there's activity in those regions, it causes actions in the game, like moving the paddle. And this is a loop. So it senses, it acts, and can sense the consequences of its choices in real time. And we can run these sessions continuously.
Okay, so it's, I'm sorry, but it's learning by electrocution?
Well, I mean, very, very, very high-tech electrocution. Stimulation, electrical stimulation.
That's really like this. But okay, I think I get the basic concept, but how do I evolve from Pong to medication and to research and stuff? So I can imagine like there's this impulse, okay, there's a voltage, and then the Pong goes up and it goes down, or some, I don't know. But how do we evolve that? How would you take someone who has no idea from the industry to understand your concept?
Oh, well, I mean, when we work with people who are in the field of medicine, neuroscience, of course, they will have a very often are quite excited about what we're doing, because sometimes it's something they've wanted to do and haven't had the particular technology. So in that case, I mean, it's going to be a collaboration, of course. But I think the essence of the question is, I think, well, it's just a game, and how do you then turn that into something which is very, very useful? And there's sort of two answers. One is that the game is already very useful. The reason why we used a game like that is because when you think about it, it's interactive, it's physical, it's easy to visualize. So, when I say, okay, the amount of times that the paddle bounced the ball went up as it learned, that's something that's easy to understand. But also, it can be used to measure, for example, like the effect of a drug. So to give a concrete example, there was a series of experiments that were run, and there's a preprint paper out now, which was essentially testing various different anti-epileptic drugs, anti-seizure drugs, on these DishBrains. And what we basically saw was that, to summarize, if you had a particular type of sort of model of epilepsy, so a cell line, a cell culture, which exhibited certain properties that were similar to epilepsy in a human, that it would not play the game. It would not learn. But when we introduced these anti-epileptic drugs, performance increased in certain cases. So this is sort of showing, in this case this drug was already known to be effective, but it was showing that it could have, in principle, been discovered on our system as well.
Well, that sounds fascinating. And just I'm still trying to grasp the full concept. This is something a normal AI couldn't have done, or would it have been very difficult or very energy hungry, or what is the difference?
Well, there's so many things there, but I mean, to compare and contrast, of course, if your goal is to learn about neurons and the brain, I mean, there just is no substitute. You can simulate to an extent, but in the end, this is learning from the system itself, but in a very controlled way. So you can do some of these similar experiments in vivo, in animals that are alive, and you can also, to some extent, do a few of the experiments in people, but of course, this has serious ethical and safety considerations, and it's a very high bar. But in a system such as DishBrain, you can have a very, very fine-grained understanding of what's going on inside this biological neural network in a very, very controlled way in the lab. and you can introduce drugs, you can change conditions, and very importantly, it's very reproducible. So you don't even necessarily have variations that you would say from animal to animal.
Very interesting.
And so we try and compare and contrast, this sort of very biological system with the kind of algorithmic models we have now and statistical machine learning models we have in artificial intelligence. And I mean, that is a huge, I think, very complicated and fundamentally exciting and important question. But if I was forced to summarize in a few sentences, it would be that the brain still has capabilities that surpass AI models and that we do not understand. And so having a real, live, biological cell culture means that we can begin to understand and get insight into those processes. And still, simulating this thing is, I would absolutely argue, outside of our ability at the moment, to the degree of fidelity which is required to really understand how it's working. And of course, there have been projects that try and simulate the brain, but I would say overall, this is the superior way to understand its inner workings.
Okay, but how far away are we from that? What would you say? Is there? Can you put like a tag on that? Are we 5 years away, 10 years, 50?
I'm not falling for that one.
And how much will you speed up the process?
There's only that is an unanswerable question.
It's an Elon Musk question, no?
If I knew the future, I would be a billionaire. Let me just say this. Systems today, these sort of highly statistics-oriented systems, they are starting to display some emergent properties. But I would overall argue that that is still in its infancy, difficult to control, and not entirely understood. These systems overall are learning extrinsically. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you have a mathematical model, and then you have an optimization process, which is applied to it. And, GPT-4 is not learning all the time. It goes through a discrete training phase in a data center, and then you can ask it questions and it generates tokens one after the other, but there's no fluidity to this. Contrast that with a biological system. It is an innate learner. It's constantly learning. There is no separation between thinking and learning, so it's an intrinsic learner. And I think being able to take that sort of ability and move it into a kind of silicon model does have possibilities for certainly improving artificial intelligence. I don't have the hubris to say that this is the answer, I can predict the future, but it's something that personally I'm very excited about, interests me. And then, of course, there's always the possibility, and this was the original goal of Cortical Labs, was to scale up biological computing, because in many ways, the human brain is already the perfect computational machine, in some ways. Actually, not in some ways, in many, many, many ways, because it is a system which can, at the molecular level, organize itself to learn, to process information at an efficiency. Our brain uses an estimate of something like 20 watts. You can't even run a big GPU for 200 watts, right? So the sheer amount our brain can do, the fact that it can rewire itself at the molecular level, really shows that it's a kind of a huge bounty from evolution for cognition. So I also think that it is possible to eventually use that to create a highly engineered, genetically engineered computing element, which could then be in a data center. You could have your giant sort of brain or tissue culture matrix in a vat in your data center, and that could process a huge amount of information and be a sort of general intelligence as well. So those are all possibilities. And look, that's pretty sci-fi, but
it is pretty sci-fi.
Yeah. And it's also very exciting.
It is very exciting. And you mentioned the energy aspect. I want to come back to that in a minute. But when you talk about that that big brain in the computing center. Actually, for me, it sounds like we can cross the A from AI, and we just have an intelligence. Do you create living beings? How can I imagine that? Do these DishBrains feel something in the future? Right now, I guess not. And I mean, there's so many ethical questions to that as well. Do you encounter them? Or?
So that's such a good question. I love that you came to like taking the artificial out of AI, right? Because that was one of the things I think we had that we started saying, you know, this is not artificial intelligence, it's genuine intelligence, right? Or moving towards that. So yeah, look, now that we've been growing brain cells in a dish for a long time, but now you have a system which is actually interacting with an environment that does raise some interesting questions. And I think there's sort of two parts of that answer. And the first part is that it's about humility, it's about openness, it's about communication and engagement. So we see ethical science, good science, and open science as all together. Our chief scientific officer has even collaborated with skeptics on ethics papers. We've really engaged with sort of key ethicists on these issues. So instead of saying kind of, there's an end point and science is done to you, our viewpoint has always been, it's evolving. It's about understanding as a group of scientists, as a society, what the kind of decisions and conventions about how to go forward with this research will be, should be, and can be shaped together. So in that sense, you know, our kind of key idea is it's not for us to decide, it's to decide as kind of a group and to collaborate and to communicate. And then I think the second part of it is that these systems that we're talking about now, the DishBrain today, is still kind of has a number of neurons that would be similar to, say, a dragonfly. So the idea that it would be conscious or could suffer, I think, is not supported by the evidence so far, or not supported by the best theory so far. And of course, that's not definitive, but it's something that is our sort of the general position we take at the moment.
Yeah, I know this was kind of a far-fetched question, but it was kind of the first thing that sprang to my mind when I did the research before. And like you, I find it very, the sci-fi aspect I find very interesting, very fascinating, with all the consequences, no? In a good and in a bad way. I always believe in the good way, and it sounds like you approached the topic. Let's circle back a little bit. When and why did you come up with that idea for a DishBrain? I mean, that doesn't sound like something you put down on a piece of paper after having the fifth beer. What was the need for that?
That's where you have all the best ideas.
Yeah, after the fifth beer, yes. I'd say yes.
Yeah.
Next day, I'm not so sure.
You know, so I think as a technologist and as someone who just wants to invent really cool things, you have to skate to where the puck is going. You have to lead. And like I remember it very vividly. I was having a conversation with one of the co-founders, Hon, and at that time we were thinking of doing something in deep learning. But the problem was, at that time, Silicon Valley was going to cut our lunch. And there was a lot of talk, and some of the luminaries of artificial intelligence now, I think I recall at least Hinton and I think Jan LeCun as well, was saying like, we have to go back to the biology. Like if we want to move forward in AI, we have to go back and find more inspiration from biology. We kind of took that literally. And it also turns out that in Australia, there is a sort of, I think, real comparative advantage in life sciences. So we had a kind of...
Why is that?
Well, there's some extremely good institutes sort of located in Australia and in Melbourne. And so those things together kind of let us really realize that we could do something different. And we had some very early collaborations, and those started to go well, and it kind of built momentum. So overall, it was a decision to say, well, you know, you can do something like Han has this saying, which is don't plant your tree in somebody else's forest, you know. So doing just another deep learning startup was not something we were so excited about at the time. So this is sort of where it led to us. But it was analysis. I think there was a part of it was passion and kind of like, well, this is sci-fi, and another part was analysis, saying like, where are things going? Yeah.
And that was how long ago?
That was, I think it was like around 2018, 2019 was when we started having these conversations, but I'm a little hazy on the timeline now. Yeah.
Well, but not so long ago, and you went quite a far away from there. I mean, you got a big funding from an Australian university, if I'm right, and you are near a prototype version now, or near you have a prototype version. You're near a full series, so you're in the market soon, right?
Well, so Cortical Labs is a venture capital funded company, and we've had some incredible investors. Like among them would be Blackbird and also Horizons Ventures, we also have taken some money that was kind of collaborations with universities, which came with some grant money, but that's not our main focus. We are a venture-funded startup. And yeah, so the sort of headline prototype was DishBrain. That had a lot of news. I think the paper itself, which was kind of like the DishBrain paper, was, it was well received. I recall that at some point we had very, very high kind of like alt metrics, so people were interested in the paper. And now the CL1 production unit is sort of, I guess you would call it like, progressing well. So that would be starting with pilot programs with researchers, which will be expanded soon.
Okay, so I know you don't like to look into the future and predict, but
I love looking into the future. I just don't like making concrete predictions. I'm being like, is it 5 years? Is it 10 years?
Yeah, but
6 months.
6 months. No, I mean, so what do we have to expect from Cortical Labs in the future, in the near future, in the mid future, and what are the next milestones? Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, so specifically for Cortical Labs, I think right now really focused on the CL1. And with, especially in my time when I was a CTO, one of the challenges we had was that we had so much we wanted to do. And so a really important thing was choosing what we would do and staying focused. So right now, I'm very focused on the CL1. And I think when that's really, I guess, like, when that's going well, then I think the question is, how we expand, what the future is, but that'll be a strategic decision I think we make somewhat after that. And of course, there are a lot of different areas of ongoing research, tissue scaffolding, hybridization, sort of bringing more machine learning in. So there's always many different ongoing sort of research elements. It'll be, I think, also interacting with customers of the CL1 to see what they need, what their labs need, what assays they need. So it'll kind of be, I think, in that sense, a bit collaborative.
I see. One last thing to wrap that up. You mentioned it very briefly. It's about energy. It's also the topic or the motto of the next show 2024. You said 20 watts for the DishBrain, and
no, that's for a human brain.
That's for a human brain.
For the DishBrain, I mean
is
the amount
less.
Of much less.
But let's go a bit into the future to a human-sized DishBrain. Let's say normal AIs take up a lot of energy. Is potentially a predecessor of the DishBrain. Is that the solution to our energy problems? To put it very briefly, or can it be?
Like this is a deep, complex, and speculative area, but overall, I would say what's undeniable is that biological computation is like order of magnitudes more efficient than what we currently have. But it's very, very different in its capabilities and how it works, clearly. although it has the ability to form abstractions and learn, which have not really, I would say, been demonstrated in artificial models. So that is all to say, I do believe that if we wanted to produce something which had a human-like calculation capability, we will need, a human-like cognitive ability, we will need, and we want to do that in a way that's very scalable, that can be done sort of at a mass production level, it will require radically new architectures, and biology and biological systems could completely replace, or at least play a part in building those. And there's, there's, as I said, there's a lot of details and it's highly speculative, but overall, it also a huge opportunity.
I see. So we have to wait for that.
Well, yeah. I mean, hopefully we don't have to wait for it. We can try and invent it.
Okay, okay, I see. One last question. Could I play Pong against the DishBrain if I went to your laboratory in Australia?
Yeah, one of the early gimmicks we had is we wanted to have like the Neuralink monkey from going against our DishBrain in like a head-to-head. Okay. But we tried to put it together, but unfortunately it didn't happen. That would have been fun. So you can definitely come and try and maybe do a lab tour. You can see the cells. We never set up a 2-player version, but maybe we should. Yeah.
I definitely think about that. Thank you so much, Andy. That was a pleasure talking to you. I have a lot to digest now, and I will follow your work very closely and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.